Now I have this car for sale here, and I want someone to buy me out of it because I don't want to get involved in all this. I got a lot of projects around here, and the longer it sits, the more likely it is that I'm going to involve myself with this car in ways that I don't have time for. So, you know, we'll just see here. Definitely sitting on the fender of a 70 Torino is never my dream. I can accordion myself in here. Oh boy. That is full coil bind and it's not coming up. Desperate times, desperate measures, all that jazz. I'm Luke, Thunderhead289 here on YouTube, and a weekend or so ago I bought this 1970 Torino drag car, one of those things you see for sale in the first 20 minutes, estate sale type deal. Really good deal, so you run out and buy it and figure out what you're going to do later. So we're on to that later thing, so now let's jump into this car. Sat for a long time, 10-20 years, so we'll see what we can make of it here. I'm sure we're in for a little adventure. So with that, let's jump right in. Now, it was a pretty neat car in its day before the Motor City meth heads got a hold of it and spray painted it flat black and all the other tomfoolery we're gonna see. But it's got skinnies up front, big old fatties out back. It's a 385 series, 429 or 460, hard to say at the moment. Looks like a 429, but we'll see. You know, C6 with a shift kit back here. And like I said, it's been back halved pretty darn aggressively in the past, maybe 20 years ago or so. You know, it's got all the tomfoolery on it, so you know it had some weird ownership in its day. Really mean looking car though. Looks pretty sinister from the front and back. Big old fat tires in the rear end here. Can slide in. You can see there's been a lot of work done back here in the past. So it's going to be interesting. I don't have any keys to the car. It is titled. So, you know, when the fella passed away, he took the keys with him to his grave. It sat for 10-20 years. The wife held on to it. At some point, one of the kids got a hold of it and painted it, but I don't think they ever got it going. Again, just kind of a lot of unknowns here. So, the very questionable skinny front wheel here. Steering lock is questionable. Weird shifter pattern here that I'm not familiar with. I think it's a C6. Obviously all the gauges, some weird electronics in here, and you know, poking around, found kind of a build sheet, maybe, question mark, in the glove box here. So it could be a built engine, could not be, hard to say. You know, this was probably from years and years ago. So let's get that hood open and get to the engine and see what we have and don't have. Now I have this car for sale here, and I want someone to buy me out of it because I don't want to get involved in all this. I got a lot of projects around here. And the longer it sits, the more likely it is that I'm going to involve myself with this car in ways that I don't have time for. So, you know, we'll just see here. Yeah, it's definitely 385 series for sure. Taking a look at the engine here. At some point, you know, probably when it got painted flat black, my understanding is the fella passed away, and then a grandkid or something thought they were a real Vincent Van Gogh here with a rattle can and just got buck wild. I mean, you can see where they sprayed everything, sprayed the intake. They even sprayed the carburetors, which They're the very expensive center squirters. I'm amazed they're not seized up from sitting all this time. I know the car sat outside for a while. My favorite part is they even went through the effort to rattle can the oil filter. Very strange. So, you know, I think some kids got a hold of it and spray painted the plug wires too. And oh, look, even the plug, that's nice. Some kid got a hold of it, thought he was gonna get it going, really didn't have the mechanical aptitude for it. And then, you know, it sat in the backyard for a little while. So with that, let's see what we got here. Now, I know stuff sitting isn't super good outside. And when I bought it, the crank didn't move at all. It moves a little bit from wrenching on the thing, but you know, for all intents and purposes, I would consider it locked to. All right, created some access down to the crank now of this big old engine. So I'm really hoping this doesn't turn and then I can move on from this car, but seeing as how it's a Ford, oh, it's tight. God dang it. And of course it moved. So usually, I've seen this movie before. Man, it does move. Son of a gun. Usually when stuff sits like this, in the Iowa humidity outside on the dirt, it percolates up, kind of condensates in the engine, and over time the cylinders rust up, which I'm going to get a Borescope on it here, and now that it moved, I'll fill all the cylinders with oil so we can kind of lube it up. But usually they're seized up tight when that happens, and I guess this one might want to run, wouldn't you know it. And that right there is why I have this car for sale. I knew that as soon as I started laying hands on it, I'd become pretty mentally vested in the thing, which has already started here. And it's just going to get harder and harder to let go for me. It's just a wicked cool car, and it's got the Mad Max vibes that I totally like. It's just a lot of cool stuff in here. Old school MSD 6AL. Got maybe a rev limiter module there. Hard to say what that is. I'll have to do some looking. Some other interesting stuff going on. Makes you wonder if it is a real Cobra car. That'd be interesting. I mean, this is inset into the dash, so it really does make you wonder. There's cobwebs and huge spiders all over this thing still. Plug wires have been on for a while. Nice tight fit here between the headers and the shock tower. This engine's huge in here. Hard to say what that means. 429, was this a junkyard engine? I don't know. We'll be pulling the valve covers here after we get a look at the cylinders, fill it with oil, and see if that crank will move. So we have driver's side cylinder bank out, and everything looks pretty okay. Definitely was running rich, which if it was running with that intake, I'm not all surprised when I was just putzing around town, but they come out pretty easy, so that's a good sign. And none of these are rusted up, which is what you typically see if cylinders are gacked. I'm sure they got a little surface rust in them from sitting all that time, but might be recoverable. I don't think my normal flavor of engine abuse of pouring oil down the cylinder is going to work because we're so tight in here. Option 2. PB Blaster. Now I feel really bad. Well, the passenger side bank looks really good. It almost looks like someone fogged the engine. Like maybe someone put this engine in here and never got it done or fired up at some point. I know the poor fella, you know, he got cancer and he lost his leg, and he was still alive and had this car around, so perhaps he shoehorned this in here and then all the paint and stuff happened afterward. I know when I bought it, it had absolutely no oil on the dipstick, so, you know, it raises some eyebrows. But all right, here goes nothing, I guess. Not a lot of resistance now. Turns pretty good, and seems like we're hitting something. And there we go. We've come to a hard stop. Perhaps our old friend Mr. Valve Train Came for a visit and it's seized up, so I think we're at the valve cover point now. All right, driver's side valve cover away. Oh yes, look at that. The moisture did make its way into the top of the engine like one would expect. Let me give you a look here. So to me, this looks like fairly stock style 429, 460 stuff. You can see where the rust has crept in, and it's hard to say how far this protrudes. What I'm assuming is that one of the valves is stuck down and we're hitting it when we're trying to bring a piston up. I wouldn't be at all surprised, and that makes sense. So what I can do is pop all these rockers, and then one of these valves is probably sitting down. Probably the intake valve that was open on the intake side, and then the moisture just got the best of it. Now for what it is, it does look to be pretty clean under the hood here, but you know, that can honestly be pretty bad. Old oily engines that have burned a lot of oil, the cylinders are, you know, they have a good oil sheen to them. You know, they generally come back from sitting a long time. That's not necessarily the case on a clean engine, because, you know, you basically have bare metal and the moisture just wins the battle on that one. So I've looked all over for a hole in the side of the block. Given, you know, the car's pedigree, one would surely think that, oh, they blew the engine up and parked it, but I can't see anything that's exited the block. Not saying there's anything not wrong with the bottom end, but I haven't seen anything that necessarily says that just yet. Hard to say, you know, it could be, you know, this little bit of rust up here in the valve train. You know, you can get that on the lifters too, and then they will not go back into the lifter bore, and you can get stuff hanging up like this also, which happened on my coworker's Fox body actually. Get you a little look in here, and basically the rust that you see on the push rods, again, that can get down on the lifters basically, and then they won't go back into the bore. Now I was hoping to see something questionably loose, like a valve sitting down a ways, but I'm not seeing any of that. So what we're going to do is we're going to pull the valve train off, make sure all of, or at least loosen it, make sure all of the valves come up, and then we're going to rotate the engine, take a look, and if I can't see anything, the intake manifold is next on the list. All right, popping the valve train off revealed some weird stuff. Definitely found a culprit as to something that wouldn't allow the engine to turn over. So we'll address that, but yeah, some interesting stuff. I found a push rod laying in the engine bay, which is kind of interesting as all the push rods are there. And it's probably associated with this cylinder also. So check this out. So I discovered this laying kind of down in that general jurisdiction in the fender. So obviously we have a push rod that came out. Someone was either working on it and lost it, hard to say. But if we look in here, these are all, they're kind of the in-betweener years where, see, they're loose, but they're technically pedestal rockers, and they're retained on the valve with the tip of the rocker itself. Kind of has a little piece that keeps it contained. But, you know, these are supposed to be loose, and we come over here, and this is like what you'd see on a Chevy 350. They're tight all the way down. They're like a locking nut. So that shouldn't be here, and that's kind of curious. So, you know, I wouldn't be surprised if something went on with that cylinder at some point. But here's what I believe to be our culprit that's stopping the engine from rotating. You can see that that valve is good and set down into, you know, it's in lift mode here, and we're not telling it to do lifty things. So like all things, there's a right way to do things and a wrong way to do things. I try and err on doing the wrong thing the right way. So with that, some percussive maintenance is in order. We got a brass hammer here, and we're going to just whack on that valve until, you know, the farther I push it in, the spring tension gets stronger and stronger, and a lot of times between the percussive maintenance here and the spring pressure, it'll break that valve free. So. All right, I've rotated the engine to where it can freely move, so we're not going to hammer the valve right into the piston. That's not a good sign. That is full coil bind and it's not coming up. Interesting. I walked away for a second and heard a boing. And look at that. It's not all the way up, but it came back up pretty far. You know, it's not in coil bind. So I guess I'm going to keep whacking on it. I'm going to go get the Borescope and see if, you know, possibly someone way over revved this engine. We got a bent valve and that's as far up as it can go. But obviously the valve stem is not super happy in there, either from rust or it's bent. All right, so we got the Borescope in here, and keep in mind these two are actually the same cylinder here. So, you know, obviously some tomfoolery went on here. And then we have our valve scenario going on. So with the Borescope in, you can see our valve friend on the upper right just sticking out ever so slightly. You can see the ring of rust from the engine sitting. I can still see some cross hatching in there, but you know, that's pretty subjective. But definitely that valve is not our friend. So we need to get that up or it's not going to rotate over. And this is kind of a cool view here. We got the crank. We're going to rotate. It gets tight on that rust right there, ironically. Keep going. And we have stopped. So yeah, this is the type of stuff I don't usually show that I do, but we got a little pivot, little breaker bar. We're giving it the old tappy tap, and that valve is, of course, finally coming up. Definitely not what I love to do, but at least at this point, it sure beats pulling the cylinder heads. Is it the right thing? Of course it isn't. I hate to even admit that that worked, but the valve is back up now and being a valve again. In the lower right, you can't see it. And now you can see that good rust ring in the cylinder from it sitting, but at least our valve is out of the way. I'm not totally convinced that that's the only problem. I wouldn't be surprised if we're pulling the intake. We're getting past that point of where we were hung up, but we're still hitting something. This is not my dominant hand. There we go. So we found a new tight spot, and I don't see anything in the valve train, so I think our old friend the intake is coming off. When we pull the intake, we don't want to dump a bunch of garbage in the engine because that totally matters on this thing. Keeping with the rust theme, I see. And the cam gear here on the distributor looks like darn near brand new, like almost no runtime, but on a drag car, that doesn't really mean anything, you know. Something like this lives its life clearly a quarter mile at a time, and quite possibly a quarter mile too many. All right, intake bolts are out. Intake is loose. Bet you that thing's pretty darn heavy. Well, here goes nothing. If my back didn't already hurt today, which it does, it's definitely going to hurt after pulling that giant monstrosity of an intake off there. It's got these intake studs on it, which are slightly precarious. Got to lift it basically straight up. Oh, maybe we can do this. Nope. This is definitely one where it's nice to have a buddy. Okay. Ouch. Right in the old noggin. Definitely sitting on the fender of a 70 Torino is never my dream. If I can accordion myself in here. Oh no, bloody fuel pressure gauge, mate. Don't know how I missed that one. Of course, I don't usually have a fuel pressure gauge mounted to my hood. Okay. Oh boy. Now what? Oh no, vacuum line. Looks pretty clean, actually. Oh, maybe not. Okay. All right, we got the engine reduced to its inner nucleus here. And you can see from sitting, you know, a little moisture does develop in the engine. Now, hard to say how long this sat outside or sat around, but there's a good chance if it sat a lot longer, it would be entirely junk, if it isn't already. And so basically what I'm looking for at this point is I'm looking for a lifter that is stuck. It doesn't want to, it'll be stuck in the bore and it won't ride on the cam lobe, and actually it'll stop the engine with the cam. So this is what we want to see. I have all the rockers, you know, loose here, so there should be no resistance on the lifters. So like that one there. So see that we're loose. I cannot move that lifter. So that's a problem. Basically, we're just going to go around and find all the ones that don't move. So that one there is questionable at the back. Good. Good, good, good. Questionable. So we have 3 that seem like they could be stuck. Now, luckily for me, the 385 series has this big gaping hole everywhere, so we can just get in there and probably pry that up through, kind of sand it off, and stick it back in, because, you know, that's obviously the right thing to do in this scenario, but it'll probably work out. Looking at the cam, I mean, that thing does not have a lot of run time. I don't think this engine has a lot of run time. How hard it's been beat on in that time, oh, you know, that's pretty subjective. Probably pretty hard. Feel pretty bad about doing this, but this breaker bar or pry bar, there we go. Let's have a look at that guy. I'll call that success. The breaker bar isn't hardened and all this stuff is, so should be all right. There you can see a fair amount of the rust was holding that guy up. So I got all of them free now. Cool, we did that one right on camera. That was convenient, except for that back one. It's kind of, you can see it just kind of protruding. It's pretty precarious to get to. I'm gonna set that there. We'll clean that up before we actually try and do something. Come on, little guy. Desperate times, desperate measures, all that jazz. I've resigned to taking the lifter apart at this point. There we go. A little bit of moisture in there for sure. Now I'll put a little expandable thing down in there, expand it, and see if I can't draw this thing out. It's pretty darn tight in there, I will say. Do you ever just make something with a welder that you're entirely ashamed of making? Well, today's the day for myself. This is an expandable wall hanger. I think I'm gonna drop that right in there. It's been precision welded to be just about the same size, so we'll expand that, and then I'll have something to grab onto, and then we'll draw that lifter out. Ooh, and that's still really hot. And finally, with this random assortment of things, I was able to draw the lifter out, and it had a bunch of gunk on it, so big surprise. Glad that's over. Time to rotate the crank. Now, I'm not strikingly optimistic because this is just all the stuff from sitting. Okay, and we are hitting something again. And so I think today, as far as engine work goes, I'm going to stop on the Torino here. You know, kind of suspicious of what's going on there. This is like an archaeological dig on a drag car to figure out why was it parked. You know, it sat for a long time. What's all going on? So I think we encountered a lot just from sitting, but there's probably a good chance that this car was parked for a reason. I mean, the thing's pretty darn cool, and you don't just casually park it in the woods and the weeds for no good reason at all, usually. So one more thing I want to do before we end our video today. I want to see what's in the trunk. So that mildly hurt me to do to this car, but I didn't see any other solution. So now there's a little slot in there. You get a little flat blade screwdriver, give it a pop. Maybe. There we go. First time looking in the trunk. Oh, there goes the rest of the door lock. Not sure what this tomfoolery is. Big old fuel cell in here. Gas can, battery cutoff switch stuff. Nothing too wild. I was hoping to find the door bars. Looks like just a trunk with a fuel cell. Nifty little cap on it though. Big old breather vent right to the ground. Surely mice crawled up and got inside of it. Interesting. You can see all the tub work in the back. So someone spent a lot of time and a lot of money on this car some 20, 30 years ago. There you go. One bad 429. Maybe once upon a time. Ooh, scorcher out today. It's 100 degrees outside and even warmer in this building. I'm about to run out of my light, so I think I'm going to call it for today. If you want to see me continue on this car, leave a comment below. I got a lot going on, but you know, I'm just having way too good of a time climbing in the engine bay of this thing and playing around. And I'd love to build an engine for it and really get this car set up. It's a very capable drag car. A lot of the hard work is done, and I bought it assuming the engine was junk. I thought we might get lucky, and we still might, but that's pretty up in the air. So at this point, if you want to see more of this car, just let me know, and I'll catch you guys for the next one.